Well, hello everyone, it is Ben Hardy here, and in today's video I'm going to be talking about what I would do if I were running a dealership considering everything that's happening in today's market. Now, I am somewhat talking out of my you-know-what because I don't have the money necessary to go and buy my own dealership. However, after working in the car business and after working with over 40 different dealers, I have a pretty good idea of the different business models that dealers will use and frankly, which models are better than others. But before we get into this video, as always, if you want to save time and money the next time you purchase a car, link to my car buying guide in the description down below. And then if you want to see more videos just like this, then I recommend you subscribe because I post content every single day. Let's get into it. So let's just pretend for a second that I just won the lottery and I'm going to take my lottery winnings and go buy a new car franchise. The first thing that I would do as the owner is set the precedent that we are never going to charge over MSRP for our new product. MSRP is the max amount that we would ever charge. And if the market cannot support MSRP pricing, then we would obviously not charge MSRP. We would charge what our competition is charging on our product or charge what is necessary to move the product. Now, I'm not saying that I would open up a dealership that would lose money on cars because ultimately a dealership is a for-profit business. But from what I've seen, dealers that never charge over MSRP, no matter what the market is doing, tend to have much better long-term customer relations. Now, the thing to note is dealers that do decide to charge over MSRP, they aren't going anywhere anytime soon. Like, they aren't going to go out of business. Everyone pretends like people are not going to buy from those dealers anymore, but that's not reality. What instead happens is they have to work a little bit harder to get customers because they aren't going to have as many repeat customers as a dealer that doesn't ever charge over MSRP. And again, this is something that I see happening in real time. The dealers that I film for that never charge over MSRP have waiting lists that are miles long for all of their product. And so right now, while the car market's contracting, they're still selling vehicles on a very regular basis and they don't have trouble selling them. Whereas the dealers that charge over MSRP, they are still selling vehicles. And now they've brought down their prices to match the dealers that didn't charge over MSRP, but their sales staff is having to work a little bit harder to get customers because, again, they just don't have as much repeat referral business. And so I would want to be in this for the long term. And so I would just set that as the precedent. And I think that this is what dealers should do if they want to have a dealership that is successful over the short term and over the long term as well. If you focus on customer relations rather than trying to squeeze every last dollar out of your customers, that always ends up being the best for you and for your customers as well. So the next thing that I would do is I would merge two roles at the dealership into one role, and that is the salesperson and the finance manager. A few stores that I filmed for have done just this, and it works out amazingly well because it actually helps out with customer retention. And it also helps out with salesperson retention as well, which is really important because dealerships struggle to keep salespeople over the long term. So when it comes to the customer retention side of things, if a customer only has to work with one person throughout the entire transaction, it makes the transaction a lot better for the customer. It's a lot less stressful because they're not getting ping-ponged to different people throughout the dealership with the buying process. So that's the first thing. And then with the salespeople, because they're doing two different roles, they can make substantially more money than if they were just doing one role or the other. If you look at the average salesperson prior to the pandemic, they were making somewhere around $30,000 per year in the US, which, yeah, that's definitely not a lot. Now, obviously the pandemic inflated wages quite a bit, but we're starting to come down. And I think that once everything kind of levels off within the car market, salespeople are probably going to be making somewhere in the $50,000 to maybe $60,000 range on average here in the US. Finance managers make substantially more. What you will typically see is they'll make at least $100,000 per year, but there are plenty of finance managers that are making $200,000 to $300,000 per year. And so by combining these roles together, you can have one person that is, even if they're not selling that many cars, still able to make, six figures and potentially a multi-six-figure salary. And if someone's making that much money, then the chances of them staying at the dealership, considering how much work that a salesperson has to put in and how much work a finance manager has to put in, the chances that they're gonna go up just exponentially. And so it's pretty much a win-win on all bases. Again, the customer has a better experience, and then the salesperson gets to make more money than if they were just a salesperson. And frankly, they typically get to make more money than if they were just a finance manager. Now, since I would have these salespeople in this position where they are both a salesperson and a finance manager and would have better retention with the salespeople themselves, so I'm not having to constantly train new salespeople, that would then put me in a position where I wouldn't have to hire as many managers. With this particular setup, what you'll typically see is a dealership, instead of having to have, 3, 4, 5 different sales managers, will only typically have to have maybe 1 or 2 sales managers, and then a general sales manager and a general manager. And so that saves me as the owner a ton of money on salaries. And frankly, if I need to lower the prices on my vehicles to match what's happening with current market conditions, then I'm going to be able to afford that more so compared to a dealer that has a larger staff. And this is something that I want to emphasize with this kind of model, is with dealers that have adopted this model, it looks like they typically are able to run on a much smaller staffing compared to other dealers. And when you have less people on your payroll, right, that means that there's going to be more profits for you as the owner and more profits for the dealer. And this isn't like all like benefit to the dealer, because there are people doing multiple roles. Again, like I said, with the salespeople, for example, they're typically making more money, and then the managers are also typically making more money than if they were having to share their pie with more managers. And so again, it's like a win-win for everyone. Now, this model is not perfect because, first off, one of the big blocks to this model is finding the right people. You're going to have to find go-getters that are willing to work substantially more than what you will see with average sales people. A lot of my friends that work for dealers that have a model like this work every single day of the week, and they're not just like working a 9 to 5. Like, a lot of them will go into the dealership at opening and then they won't leave until close. And so that is, I would say, the biggest downside to this model. But what some dealers have done to kind of make it so this model is a little bit more accommodating considering the slightly longer hours is they'll usually cut their business hours, and they'll frankly cut the amount of days that they're open. And so instead of being open for 6 or 7 days a week, maybe the dealership will only be open for 4 or 5 days during the week. And then instead of their operating hours being from, like 7 a.m. in the morning until 9 o'clock at night, they trim their hours to be from, maybe they open at 9 and then they close at like 5 or 6. Right? And so their operating hours are obviously shorter. And so that means that if their sales staff is there every single day, 5 days a week, and they're there from open until close, it's still difficult, but it's not nearly as difficult if the hours are longer and the days of operation were longer as well. And if you're wondering, dealers that have decided to do this don't actually sell fewer cars. A lot of the times they actually sell more cars, because when their staff is at the dealership, they're like super engaged. Like, they're ready to go, because it's like they just had 2 days off in a row, and then they just pop in and they just blow through those 5 days, and then they just go back to taking a break for 2 days. And so it seems like in practice it works pretty well. And this same logic can somewhat be applied to the service department at a dealership, because what you will typically see is a dealership will have a group of people, service reps, that will help out customers with general servicing of their vehicles, and then they'll have like a parts department that'll help out customers if they want to accessorize their vehicles. I think that kind of melding these roles together can be pretty beneficial. And, with most brands, the amount of accessories that are offered on the vehicles isn't insane. And so it's not that difficult for a person to be able to have knowledge of all the accessories, and to also be able to help out customers that are just doing regular servicing, like maybe something broke on their car or an oil change. And so just like, combining the salesperson, the finance manager role, this will allow the people that do this, double role to make slightly more money than what they would make, and it would definitely keep them busy. And since customers would be able to work with just one person rather than going from service to parts and back and forth, again, just working with one person, it would just make the experience overall a lot more streamlined. And just like the example that I gave with sales, this would allow a slight cut down with, again, overall salaries you'd have to pay, because you just have fewer people working in that department. And this now leads me into talking about the auxiliary roles at the dealership. These are roles that are generally paid via salary that a dealership has to have to run the business. But a lot of these, frankly, can be trimmed down or modified to run a lot more efficiently. So first off, with front desk people, receptionists, those don't really have to exist at most dealers, because you can just have the calls go to the sales staff. And this, frankly, is something that a lot of dealers are starting to adopt. And then when it comes to, greeting customers when they come in, well, if you have salespeople that are making a very good living because they are a finance manager / salesperson, they will be more than happy to greet any customer that comes in and, direct them where they need to go. And then same thing when it comes to the service department side of things. And so you can pretty much just get rid of that role at the dealership. And then, you're still going to have like the accounting role and all that kind of stuff. You got to have people dedicated to the financial stuff of the dealership. So that, I'm not really going to put any modifications there. You need the amount of people that you need depending on how large the dealership itself is. And then the last main role is going to be, the lot technician / car washers, right? The people that get the cars detailed. And I think that if the dealership invests in a really good touchless car wash, that this role can pretty much be gone away with, because you can just have the sales staff park the vehicles. Yes, I understand that there are some dealerships that have so many cars that you need a lot technician. But with what we've seen over the last few years with car availability, and frankly, the direction we're going towards, where dealers are going to have fewer and fewer cars, you don't need to pay someone a full-time living to park cars necessarily. Instead, you just have your salespeople go out first thing in the morning when there are no customers, make sure everything looks nice and pretty when it comes to parking. And if you need the cars that are out in the lot to be cleaned, there are a lot of third-party companies that will come down to dealerships and charge next to nothing to clean off the cars, and then boom, you don't have to worry about, again, you don't have to worry about a lot tech. And then, like I said, when it comes to washing the cars, like if you have a good enough touchless car wash that it's installed at the dealership and a good drying system, then you can make it so the exterior of the cars look fantastic. And then, when it comes to the detailing and everything of the used cars, maybe that's what you hire someone for. Like you hire a detailer for the dealership, and frankly, you might only need to hire like 1 or 2 people depending on how much volume the store does, but that's just to clean up the really messy cars. Now, this dealership model is far from perfect. There is no perfect dealership model to be adopted, but this is definitely a lot more efficient than what we see out there with how a lot of new car dealers are run. And with that efficiency, again, it saves the dealership money, and it also gives the customer a much better experience, which can ultimately also lead to the customer saving money if the dealership, again, needs to discount more to, put a car deal together, because they just don't have as much overhead as their competition because of the business model that they have adopted. And so I want you guys to let me know which model you think would be best, and don't say direct to consumer sales. I know I'm going to get plenty of comments saying direct to consumer sales, but I've mentioned this over the course of several videos. That's just not practical. That is something that will continue to happen with automakers like Tesla and Rivian, the new EV startups. But with the legacy automakers, they're going to continue to use the dealership model because it's what makes the most sense. And so instead of trying to, fight the dealership model, I think the better thing to do is basically suggest how can we improve how the dealership model is run. And at least that's how things are going to be in the short term. Maybe in 30 to 50 years from now, dealerships will no longer exist on the new car side because, the whole auto industry will be completely changed. But for the time being, what would you do to improve the model that's actually practical and realistic? Anyways, that's going to sum things up. I'll see you.